So what are the social benefits for honeybees living in a honeybee society? Well, first of all, they have a public health service, just like us. That's one of the things that we're guaranteed, and that's one of the things that are provided to us by our governments, our society. They have both social immunity and innate immunity, just like us. We have an immune system that is involved in fighting off the potential diseases that we might get, and then we have a social immunity system whereby we immunize, we bury people before they can spread diseases, etc. So what do the honeybees have? Well, they have an undertaking. They have grooming, where they groom off parasites and predators. A colony can produce a fever. If a colony has a particular kind of pathogen inside of it, the bees will vibrate their wing muscles, increase the heat, and overall the heat of the nest will go up, and actually with some of these disease agents will kill them. They have hygienic behavior, like we do, and they also embalm things that they can't remove from the nest, such as a mouse might get into the nest, and they'll kill the mouse, but it's too big for them to drag out, so they will encase it. They'll embalm it in this material called Propolis, which is made from plant resins. They'll just seal it off, and then it won't be a problem with respect to spreading pathogens. There's a plethora of bee pathogens out there. There are viruses that attack them, like the figure here at the top. This is a curly wing virus that it affects them during development. When they emerge from their cells, their wings are all curly and messed up, and they are detected by the other bees, and soon they're removed from the nest, hopefully removing some of the virus problems that are associated with it. This little mite right here is called varroa. It carries these viruses, inoculates the bees as pupae, and then when they emerge, they have these curly wings that are deformed. This mite right here is the main cause of the so-called disappearing disease of honeybees, the colony collapse disorder you've heard about. This caused this big decline in commercial honeybees across the whole country, in fact, most of the world. They also have bacteria. This bacterium is called American foul brood disease. It attacks the larvae and pupae. It turns them into this gooey brown mess that stinks. It's a major problem for commercial beekeepers. They're constantly having to fight this bacterial infection. They have fungi that attack the larvae and turn the larvae into these hard chalk-like, they call them mummies. And these mummies are full of spores, and if the bees are messing with them, they spread the spores around, and it can kill a colony or decrease the strength of the colony to where they're barely getting along and they're not very productive. And bees have dysentery. There's a protozoan that will get into a colony, and then the bees will get the dysentery. As you can see here, these are bees that couldn't wait until they usually fly away and defecate someplace out in the woods. But in this case, they just can't hold it. They defecate inside the nest and they defecate outside the nest, and it weakens the bees and weakens the colony and can kill a colony. Undertaking behavior is one of the social immunity traits that they have. Basically, bees that die or bees that are sick, they're dragged out the entrance by what we call undertaker bees. It's a special trait. There's only a certain number of bees inside of a nest or in a colony at any given time that engage in this particular behavior. So they'll take a dead bee, drag her to the entrance, and then fly away with her. And they'll fly away and they'll drop her body 100 meters or more from the nest. So they get rid of it. It would be like your roommate got COVID and you picked her up and you drove her out into the woods somewhere and turned her loose. Something like just get the disease away from the nest. This is a big problem when you think about it. You have this density of larvae inside of a nest. They're all there right together, so it's an epidemiologist's nightmare. You've got 7,000 larvae in a nest. You have about 8,000 bees that are nurses. They will nurse bees, meaning they'll take care of the larvae, they'll feed the larvae, and they'll do this for about early 2 weeks of their life. And at any time, you have about 8,000 nurses in a full-size colony. Combined, they'll make 1,000 visits a day to each of these larvae. Each one of them will get 1,000 visits a day. And they'll get fed about 100 times. So you can imagine if one of these nurses comes in and she has Omicron and gives the disease to one of these larvae, and then another one comes in and she cares for that larvae, then she's going to pick up the Omicron, she's going to spread it to the next one and the next one. You can see how diseases would sweep very rapidly through either a nursery in a hospital or a nursery in a beehive. So it's a real problem because you've got this great opportunity for diseases to spread to a lot of individuals very quickly. The way that honeybee societies deal with that is, again, they have a social immunity that deals with it, that slows down the transmission from one larva to the next larva. It slows it down because the queen mates with lots of different males. So she doesn't mate with just one male. She mates with multiple males. Each male has a slightly different genotype, different set of genes. Each one of them may be carrying genes that are for some kind of immunity to a particular kind of disease pathogen. So, for instance, if a disease pathogen, like Omicron, say, comes in and invades this larva, at first it may not be very well adapted to it. It may grow slowly and not spread very well, but eventually they're going to get a mutation. That mutation will be really very good for this and say it'll kill it. But before it does that, it will spread to another cell. So it gets in this other cell, and there, it's, again, not very well adapted, so it's very slow and growing, and so this would be a slow transmission. Now, if all of these larvae had, say, an identical genotype, they were identical. If one of them gets it, if a virus evolves and has mutations to where it really is good on this particular genotype, well, they all have it. So it's going to spread through in a hurry. Very rapidly, the whole colony is going to be contaminated, and it can kill the colony. Bees groom themselves. Self-grooming, this is an innate response. On the back of this bee, you can see two lumps. Well, she moved out of it, but two lumps. Those are actually flies, the varroa cica. Those are flies that don't fly, but they live on the bodies of bees in a colony, and they are parasitic in that they eat their food. You can see this one here is about ready to be removed. You can see she groomed it off of her body. But these varroa, what they do is that when the bees are nursing larvae or sharing food with the queen, they come down to where the mouth parts are. And then they will take the food that's being fed. They'll take some of it up. You'll find them on queens. They prefer to be on queens. Queens can be covered with these. And whenever the queen's being fed royal jelly from the workers, they'll run down and they'll consume the royal jelly. So this is a real problem. It's usually not lethal for a colony, but it does cause some effect on the colony. And the bees take care of that themselves with their innate self-grooming behavior. They also do social grooming. You can see this bee here. She's climbing all over this other bee, and she's working her mandibles, and she's picking stuff off of her. Maybe small parasites or pathogens, but she cleans it. And the other bee, this bee, in order to get this behavior, she does a little dance. She kind of bobs up and down on the comb, and then a bee who might be close to her, when she does that, she'll run over, she'll get on her, and she'll start grooming her with her mandibles, cleaning her up. And this is a social grooming characteristic. As I told you, the main problem for honeybees in the United States today is this varroa mite. The varroa mite evolved on a closely related species to the honeybee that you find in Asia. It's the Asian honeybee, it's Apis cerana. It evolved on that particular species. That species has a mechanism whereby this grooming behavior, they will remove the mite and kill it. Well, commercial beekeeping brought the varroa mite that evolved in Asia on the Asian honeybee, brought them into contact with the Western honeybee, Apis mellifera, which is what we use in this country for commercial beekeeping, and it did not have a defense against it. So this mite spread very rapidly. It kills colonies. The bees, when they do their grooming behavior, ignore varroa, whereas the Asian honeybee will remove it and kill it, but our Western honeybees will not. There's been a lot of attempts to try to breed bees so that they would have this particular kind of grooming, Western honeybees like what we have, so they'd have this specific kind of grooming behavior, but it's been unsuccessful so far. American foul brood disease is caused by a bacterium. The bacteria invades the larvae in a colony and has its major impact on them during a particular stage of late larval and early pupal development. And it will build up, it will liquefy the larva, and sometimes it melts, the larvae will melt down into this goo and then it will harden. And if you look in these cells, there's scales on the bottom of these, which are melted down larvae. These scales are full of the bacterium and become the inoculum to spread this disease all through the colony to all the different brood. They kill colonies. They're one of the worst problems for beekeepers to control this. A breeding program that started out, I think, the 1930s, early 40s, just purely by accident. There was a beekeeper named Mr. Brown, I can't remember his first name, and he had an apiary in the Midwest where he had a lot of the American foul brood disease. And he didn't treat for the disease. He didn't burn colonies that had the disease, which is what the law required, but he didn't do it. He just let the bees have the disease and spread it around. Eventually, his bees became resistant. And there was two researchers, honeybee researchers, learned about his bees and decided to study them. And the main one was Walter Rothenbuehler. He was at the Ohio State University. So he studied closely what were the mechanisms of resistance. Why didn't brown bees get the disease, where other bees got it very easily and it killed them? So he went and he broke down all these different kinds of mechanisms that he found that had evolved in the brown bees to help them be resistant. So one of the traits was behavioral. There was one trait that was anatomical that changed, that explained some of their resistance to the disease. There was a developmental trait that changed, and there was a physiological trait that changed. So selection just on that disease brought about these different changes in the bees. Hygienic behavior. Hygienic behavior is a behavior that has proven to be valuable not only for American foul brood resistance, but also for chalk brood resistance. And hygienic behavior is the ability of bees to detect underneath the cappings, these cappings of the pupae, detect underneath the cappings that there's something wrong with the pupa that's under there. So they can detect the disease through the capping. They then will uncap the cell and they will remove the diseased larva and get rid of it. So they're getting rid of the American foul brood disease before it gets into a slimy mess and makes those scales that make it very, very highly transmissible. The beekeepers select for this trait, and this shows one of the ways they do this selection, they'll inoculate cells in a certain area with either with the spores of the disease, or they will make pinpricks through the cappings and kill them, and then they see the degree to which the bees detect it and remove it. So this colony here is highly hygienic, where this colony here is not, because they didn't remove them all. And this, again, is a level of social immunity. The development times were altered in the brown bees relative to other bees, in that certain stage of development, here in the late larval, early pupal stage, they got to that fast. So this development in here was faster than normal. So they got it, because by the time they get into a certain age, the larvae are not susceptible to getting the disease. So they rapidly accelerate the early development before they get the disease, and then they develop at a normal rate through their other stages, and then they can emerge as an adult. If you look at the intestinal tract of a bee, you'll find that there are 3 different chambers. That's the crop. That's where they will store nectar or honey. They'll get honey from their cells, and they'll store the honey in there. Then they might feed it to other bees. They'll collect nectar in the field. They'll fill this up with nectar. And then there's the midgut. That's where the nutrients are taken out of the food, the things that they consume in the midgut. And then there's the rectum. The rectum is where what's left passes into the rectum, and the rectum extracts the water out of it before the bees then poop. So if you go right here to the junction of the crop and the midgut, there's a structure in there that's called the proventriculus. And the proventriculus is like a valve that sits between the crop and the midgut, and it can shut down and prevent honey or nectar to get passed into the midgut. But everything that goes into the midgut has to go through this filter in the proventriculus valve. So this filter is a lot of hair-like projections, and it filters out solid particles like bacterial spores and bacteria. It'll filter them out. So if you have more filtration, you'll have less passing into the midgut, and you'll have less chance of passing that on to other individuals, or even getting the disease if you happen to still be a larva or a pupa. So in these brown bees, they had more dense hair fibers in that proventricular valve. In other words, it filtered out more of the solid objects. And finally, if you look at the head of a bee, up here are glands that produce food for brood. We call them the brood food glands. So bees consume pollen. The pollen passes down through the esophagus, through the crop, passes into the midgut, and in the midgut, the pollen proteins, go into the hemolymph, the blood of the bee, which surrounds all the organs. Then the hemolymph ends up traveling up to the head, and then these glands take the proteins out of it and convert those proteins into proteinaceous secretions that are used to feed the brood. We call that brood food. The brown bees, and this is a social immunity trait, the brown bees' brood food contained antibiotics. So all the bees have some antibiotic properties to their brood food glands, but they are enhanced in the brown bees, another level of protection for bees that have been selected for being less susceptible to American foul brood disease. Propolis is used by bees in many different contexts. This is material that's collected from plants. It's resinous material. It's sticky and gummy. And they use it to seal off cracks in the nest. This is propolis that was on the lid of a commercial hive. They'll propolize all the cracks so that air can't get in and chill them down. But they also will line the inside of the nest. Inside of a cavity, they'll line the whole inside of it with this propolis because it has antibiotic characteristics or properties. So they'll use it to protect from pathogens that might be in the wood itself, rotting wood or whatever, from getting in and getting into contact with the bees inside of the nest. And they will line the entire inside of a nest with the propolis, again, as a protection.